Hello and welcome to this brand new series called Rewind or Remake. This is where we're taking a look back at a classic retro game that's got a modern remake and asking, should you go back and play the classic version or stick to the more recent release? Now, the games we're looking at today are particularly exciting ones for me because I personally think that both of these are severely underrated. So, join me as we take a look at Bionic Commando for the NES and its remake Bionic Commando Rearmed. The 1988 Bionic Commando wasn't actually the first entry in the series, with there being an arcade game released a year before in 1987 which confusingly was also titled Bionic Commando. However, despite this game having the same name, similar gameplay mechanics and even reusing certain music, it is a completely different game. So for this video we'll just be focusing on the 1988 NES version. I actually hold this game in very high regard, with it being my favourite NES game ever made, and there's tons of reasons for this too, so buckle up and let's dive into it. I think the main reason this game stands out to me is the amount of variety on offer. The core experience has you platforming around fairly openly designed levels, making your way to communication outposts which open up the exit to the stage where you have to fight a boss. Along the way you'll need to shoot your way through different types of enemies, from standard human soldiers to little robotic tanks, drone pilots, helicopter robots, and even killer plant creatures. The main distinction between this and other similar games though is that you can't jump and you have to rely on your bionic arm to swing around and use the environment to help you maneuver. This actually ends up making the game quite strategic, with you not being able to simply jump across gaps or over obstacles, but needing to chain together bionic arm swings across different objects in order to avoid falling into pits or onto spikes. It takes a little while to learn how to use the arm mechanics and make it feel fluid, but if you stick with it, you'll be swinging around and pulling off some fancy moves in no time. Whereas something like Contra is mostly about shooting and avoiding incoming bullets, and Mega Man is more focused on tight, fast-paced, precise platforming, Bionic Commando is a bit slower paced and more about movement than the actual shooting gameplay, and I think this balance makes it really stand out against the competition. Something else I love about this game is the progression system in place. Basically, after finishing a level, you enter a boss arena where there's a generator at the end of the room, and you either need to bypass an enemy to reach it or simply defeat the enemy so the generator is defenseless. After doing this, you gain access to a new weapon or tool, which then allows you to utilize them to make other levels easier or gain access to later levels at all. For example, there's a cave level which is pitch black, and by using the flare item found in a previous level, you can light it up and way more easily make it through. Or there's this level which is blocked off by a metal girder, and to get past it you need to blow it up with the rocket launcher. This makes beating the levels feel way more rewarding because you actually get to utilize the unlockables in a variety of ways. Of course, sometimes you'll get items which are more broadly useful too, like health pills which fully heal any damage taken a single time during a level, or a new gun which shoots in a different way, like for example the shotgun which shoots straight forward and up and down but has way worse range than the standard gun. The level design here is fantastic too, with most levels having some sort of gimmick which makes it distinct to the other ones. Like here we have a level where you need to travel up this communications tower, making it way more vertical than the others. Here we have a sewer level where these blobs trap you and force you to travel away from your destination if you get stuck in them. Or here you have this later level which is more maze-like in design, featuring loads of doors which take you to different areas in a big facility. You also have variety outside of the main levels too. We've already mentioned the boss fights, but then you have the level select screen which, instead of being a boring menu interface, has you control a helicopter and move around a grid. But if you bump into an enemy truck, you enter this top-down style of gameplay where you need to shoot your way to the top of the screen and blow up up the enemy reinforcements before being able to continue flying the helicopter. You also have neutral areas where your teammates have set up bases, and you can find upgrades and other useful tools, as well as talk to the soldiers stationed here. This is great for world building, with them very often talking about what's going on with the enemy, but they can also have useful tips for you, and some of them are even pretty funny, giving the game this weirdly humorous undertone. Similarly, while you're in the communication rooms, you can talk to the HQ and hack into the enemy communications, and this also helps to expand the game's universe, and again, can be pretty funny too. The graphics are also really good for the NES, with every level having different background elements and colour schemes, and the music takes this up a notch too, giving every level a really distinct atmosphere. Certain levels do reuse the same tracks, but it doesn't happen often enough to become annoying, and with how awesome this music is, you can't really be too annoyed when a tune turns up more than once. One of the most shocking moments happens at the end of the game though, where Master D, who let's face it is basically Hitler, is resurrected in order to complete his super weapon called the Albatross. Just as a quick word of warning, the next section of gameplay has some pretty fast flashing lights, so skip to the time on the screen now if you want to avoid that. So as our knockoff Hitler attempts to escape in his helicopter, you jump off of a platform and shoot a rocket through the windshield and score a headshot, which we see in some pretty gory detail. This is by far one of the most badass things I've seen on the NES. I could go on about this game for ages, but the bottom line is that this game is incredible and you should really give it a go for yourself. It's not brutally difficult like a lot of other NES games are, even allowing you to continue from the last level you're on if you get a game over. The sense of progression with all of the different unlockables is awesome, the core mechanic of swinging around just makes you feel like a badass, and the variety on offer here with all of these different types of gameplay is through the roof. So this all begs the question, what direction would you go with this if you were to remake it? Enter Bionic Commando Rearmed, released 21 years after the NES game and available on PS3, Xbox 360 and PC. This was actually one of the earliest examples of a hit digital-only game and received massive acclaim back when it first came out, but has seemingly been mostly forgotten since then despite being popular at the time. Rearmed is a pretty faithful remake in a lot of ways, featuring mostly unaltered level designs, which is awesome for fans of the original because they know just how good these levels were. However, Rearmed offers several new additions which fundamentally change your experience here. The most obvious change is that the graphics are basically up to par with modern games. Despite being released 15 years ago, I would say that this has aged incredibly well. Obviously lacking things like ray tracing or other fancy lighting effects, but still looking really good. I could see this coming out now as an indie game and nobody would even question it. The other key difference that immediately kicks you in the face is the massive improvement to the music. Most of the game features remixes of the original tracks from the NES version, and Simon Viklund, the composer of this game, did a masterful job of keeping the electronic vibe of the original but elevating it to a whole new level. After this video, go and listen to the entire soundtrack, it's insane. The communication rooms you access in order to get to the end of the levels now have a hacking minigame in order to listen into the enemy chatter. This adds even more variety than what was offered in the NES game, and I actually really like these. You basically have to guide a ball to a green cube by solving this sort of 3D maze where you have to hit into red cubes and use them to redirect your movement towards the goal. It sounds complicated, but once you get the hang of it, you'll be completing these incredibly fast. There's been some massive changes to the weapons and items you unlock, with brand new items such as the grenades, which allow you to attack enemies behind cover, as well as changes to the balancing of the weapons, with the rocket launcher no longer being overpowered like it was in the NES version, and even allowing you to swap weapons on the fly, whereas in the original you had to select a single weapon to take into each level with you. Despite the levels featuring the same core design, they also added in secret areas which weren't featured in the original version, which expands the levels and offers something new for veterans of the series. The boss battles have all been massively overhauled too, no longer all having you destroy a generator, but being more of a standard fight where the objective is to take down a big baddie by exploiting its weaknesses. For example, one of the early bosses has you avoid its shots while you swing to different levels of the arena, pick up a barrel and then throw it at an exposed section. A later example is this big robot that pulls you into the center of the arena and shoots electric rods at you in a pattern, having you memorize its attacks and then block them with your bionic arm before it overloads and the pilot becomes exposed. These boss fights are a huge improvement over the original game. Not that the boss fights there were awful, but the Rearmed fights feel a lot more developed and actually require you to use the skills developed in the levels themselves. Even the final boss has been changed, giving you a remote-controlled rocket launcher just before the fight, which allows you to control the direction of the rocket with the right analog stick. And instead of jumping off of a ledge to shoot a rocket into the cockpit of a helicopter, you actually have a more direct confrontation with the helicopter, and need to use your rockets while avoiding incoming fire. But don't you worry, the gory head explosion still happens in the remake too. On top of all of these changes, there's also a ton of extras offered by Rearmed too, like difficulty options which not only affect damage taken by enemies, but even rebalance other aspects too, like the hacking minigames being on a timer on the harder settings. There's a database which catalogues all of the environments, items and enemies you come across and gives a detailed description about them. We then have a massive selection of challenge rooms, which are basically these timed obstacle courses that act as a nice training area to get used to the bionic arm controls, as well as a test of skill if you're going for 5-star rankings. Potentially my favourite new addition though is the inclusion of multiplayer. Not only is there a competitive 4-player mode where you attempt to destroy each other with a variety of weapons, but there's also full 2-player co-op in the main game. The awesome thing with this too is that you start off sharing a screen, but if one of you goes outside the confines of the shared screen, it changes into split screen, allowing each player to freely explore without being confined to occupying the same space. Just incredible stuff. If it isn't obvious by now, I love Bionic Commando Rearmed. I actually think that it's one of the single best video game remakes ever made, and I think it's a straight up crime that it isn't more fondly remembered and still to this day hasn't received a port to modern consoles. I mean, this would be right at home on the Switch, and it would introduce the series to a brand new audience too. Sort it out, Capcom. So, would I recommend you play the original Bionic Commando or the remake? Well, this is an example where I would probably argue that there's no right answer. The original game is still a ridiculously tight experience, even playing it today. Sure, there's some modern quality of life elements that aren't present, like for example a save feature, but it's a game which is easy to just play through in a single sitting and replay again and again using the different weapons and attempting to finish it faster or without losing a continue. It's almost a bit arcade-like in that way. Rearmed is much more fleshed out and features all of those modern quality of life improvements that you would expect. The changes it makes to the gameplay, graphics, music, bosses, and all of the additional extra features are incredible. And despite all of those changes, it still somehow feels incredibly faithful. For me, it comes down to what you're in the mood for. If you're in the mood for a potentially more simple and straightforward experience that's arguably more replayable, then the original might be better. But if you want a longer game with more modern design and tons of extra content to sink your teeth into, then definitely go for Rearmed. If I had a bionic arm to my head and I was forced to pick a more definitive version of the game, it would have to be Rearmed. But I almost don't like to say that because it feels like I'm putting the original down. You know what you should do? You should just go ahead and play both versions. As for how to actually play these games, obviously the original is available on the NES. However, unlike with a lot of other NES titles, I'm fairly sure that this has never been re-released on any kind of digital store, meaning your only options are to buy the cartridge and play it on the original hardware, or to emulate it. Not exactly an ideal situation, but at least it's fairly easy to get hold of. Rearmed is maybe a little bit easier to access, but still isn't in an ideal situation. It is playable on the PS5 and PS4 via the PlayStation Plus Premium subscription, but it's not being played natively and is being streamed just like with most other PS3 games. It's a shame you can't just buy the game and own it outright, but this is an option and I'm glad it's still accessible in some form. I don't actually own an Xbox Series X, so I can't browse the store and see if it's there for myself, but I have searched the Xbox store on a web browser and it doesn't appear to be there, either meaning that it isn't on the Series X, or maybe the web version of the store doesn't show everything available. If someone could test this for me and let us know in the comments, that would be awesome. Of course, another option is that you dust off the old PS3 or Xbox 360 and download it there. Considering that these online stores are currently still online, this could be a good option to play it natively in its original format. Bear in mind though that the PS3 store has been threatened to be closed before, so get it while you can if you're going down this route. By far the easiest method of accessing it though is on PC, where it's available to download on Steam. I played the entire game on PC using an Xbox 360 controller and running Windows 11 and it ran flawlessly. Because this is an older game by today's standards, it's highly likely that basically any PC will be able to run this too. So this is definitely the best option if you wanted to give it a go. Plus, it's only £6.49, which is an absolute steal. There was a file I needed to download to get the game to run, but after that it ran perfectly. I'll put a link to the required file in the description below for if you're struggling to get it to work. Seriously though, Capcom, you've been doing such a good job making the older Resident Evil games accessible. Make these Bionic Commando games accessible too. Do a big compilation with the arcade game, the NES game, the Game Boy stuff, the Rearmed games, and the 2009 game, and I'll definitely buy it. It would be the first time a lot of those games have ever been re-released and available physically too. So there we go, that's my thoughts on Bionic Commando and its remake. We're off to a pretty positive start with this series because I think both the original and the new version are pretty incredible. But now, I want to know what you think. Have you played either of these games? And if so, what did you think to them? Or has this video got you interested in trying them out for the first time? Let me know. Also, while you're there, let me know if there's any other games you would like us to take a look at as part of this series. The obvious choices would probably be one of the Resident Evil games or one of the Pokemon games, but let me know if there's any more obscure stuff out there. For now though, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, give it a good old like, subscribe to see more retro content coming very soon, and I've been Rob from Retro Dodo, and I'll see you in the next one.